He collapsed suddenly, leaving his loyal dog behind with no explanation. At the hospital, his words went unheard, but at home, his golden retriever refused food, crying endlessly at the door. Neighbors thought it was sorrow, until one woman discovered a small folded note tied to the dog's collar. Could this faithful animal carry a secret that might save his master's life? What follows is a story of devotion, survival, and a bond stronger than any illness. Daniel Harris, 45, lived in a modest suburban home. He was lean, with a rectangular face marked by a small scar on his left cheek, dark brown hair always a little messy, and a short beard that gave him a rugged look. He wore simple clothes, a rolled-up light blue shirt, old jeans, brown shoes, and an aged silver watch. His faithful companion was Buddy, a 7-year-old golden retriever with golden fur and soulful brown eyes. Every morning, they walked the same path, sharing silence and trust. To neighbors, they were inseparable, man and dog, bound by unspoken love. Daniel's days began with quiet breakfasts, the scrape of a spoon in a worn bowl, and Buddy's watchful eyes. Afterward, they strolled the leafy streets, Daniel leaning on his wooden cane, Buddy trotting proudly beside him. Neighbors often waved, their smiles warmed by the simple picture of companionship. At home, Daniel sat reading old newspapers while Buddy rested at his feet, ears twitching at every sound. Though only 45, Daniel carried years of strain in his body. Yet Buddy's presence gave him peace. To those who knew them, their routine wasn't ordinary. It was a reminder of how loyalty heals loneliness. One morning, as Daniel poured water into Buddy's bowl, his chest tightened sharply. The spoon slipped from his hand, clattering against the table. He clutched his chest, breath shallow, face pale. Buddy barked frantically, circling him as he stumbled into the chair. Daniel's scarred cheek glistened with sweat. Pain surged through him, but he tried to stay calm. He glanced toward Buddy, whispering faintly, "Stay strong, boy." In that moment, Buddy's barks weren't noise. They were alarms, desperate calls for help. Sunlight filled the room, but for Daniel, the world seemed to dim as everything blurred into frightening uncertainty. An ambulance wailed through the quiet neighborhood as paramedics carried Daniel out on a stretcher. His body trembled, his face pale beneath the morning sun. His old silver watch clung to his wrist as if to time every second of his struggle. Buddy, barking at the open door, tried to follow, but neighbors held him back gently. His eyes widened in confusion and grief as the doors closed. The ambulance sped away, leaving Buddy standing on the porch, tail lowered. For the first time, the routine was broken, and the dog could sense life had shifted into dangerous uncertainty. Buddy sat at the front door for hours, his food bowl untouched. His golden fur glistened in the afternoon sun, but he refused to move. Each creak of the wooden steps made his ears perk. Each passing shadow made his eyes lift in hope. But Daniel did not return. Neighbors tried coaxing him with treats, yet he only whined, pressing his body against the closed door. Inside, Daniel's cane leaned forgotten against the wall. The house was still, carrying the weight of absence. For Buddy, loyalty meant waiting, no matter how long, no matter the hunger that gnawed at him. As evening fell, Buddy remained at the door. The once cheerful wag of his tail was gone, replaced by stillness. His food remained untouched, a silent protest of worry. The night grew quiet, the streetlights flickering outside, yet Buddy never left his post. He whimpered softly, pressing his nose against the wooden door, as if trying to smell his master's presence through the barrier. Inside the dark house, the familiar creaks and warmth were missing. The absence of Daniel's voice weighed heavily, and Buddy's devotion became both heartbreaking and beautiful in its quiet persistence. The next morning, Mrs. Carter, a neighbor in her 50s with auburn hair tied neatly, passed by and saw Buddy still waiting. She had often admired Daniel's bond with his dog, but now concern clouded her face. She set down a bowl of fresh water, speaking softly, "Buddy, where's Daniel?" Buddy didn't wag his tail. Instead, he looked up at her, with soulful eyes, then back at the door. Mrs. Carter frowned, sensing something was wrong. For the first time, she wondered if Buddy's silence was more than grief. It was a cry for help, one she couldn't yet understand. Inside the quiet house, Daniel's last strength before collapsing had gone into scribbling a hurried note. With shaky hands, he had folded the paper, tied it carefully with a piece of string, and secured it around Buddy's collar. The message was short but urgent, carrying instructions and a plea. Daniel had trusted his loyal friend to be the messenger. Buddy, unaware of the full meaning, only felt the weight of something important resting against his chest. His anxious eyes and restless pacing carried not just worry, but also the key to Daniel's survival waiting to be discovered. By the second day, Buddy's whines grew sharper, echoing through the street. His golden fur was ruffled, his eyes tired from sleeplessness, yet he refused to eat. He pawed at the door, paced the porch, then sat still again, always staring at the road Daniel had left on. Passers-by glanced sympathetically, but none stayed long. Mrs. Carter, however, stopped again, drawn by the desperate sound. As she knelt beside Buddy, her hand brushed against his collar. That's when she noticed the faint outline of something folded and tied beneath his fur. Her heart skipped, realizing this was no accident. Mrs. Carter carefully untied the small folded paper from Buddy's collar. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky but clear. Daniel had left instructions about vital medication and who to contact in case of emergency. She gasped, covering her mouth as the truth sank in. Buddy sat firmly at her side, eyes steady, as if urging her to act quickly. Sunlight poured across the porch, illuminating the note in her hands. In that moment, Mrs. Carter realized this dog wasn't just grieving. He had been carrying a message that could save a man's life. Mrs. Carter's heart pounded as she reread the shaky handwriting. The note mentioned Daniel's health condition and a locked box in his house containing the medication he needed. She looked down at Buddy, who stared back as though pleading for her to hurry. With trembling determination, she whispered, "Good boy, you've been trying to tell us." She tucked the note into her pocket and reached for her phone, calling the hospital immediately. The urgency in her voice matched the desperate look in Buddy's eyes. This was no longer about curiosity. It was about saving a neighbor's life. When Mrs. Carter entered Daniel's home with Buddy close at her side, the dog immediately rushed to the kitchen. His nails clicked against the wooden floor as he circled a specific corner, barking insistently. She bent down, surprised by his precision. Daniel's cane leaned nearby, a haunting reminder of his sudden collapse. Guided by Buddy's sharp instincts, she noticed a loose board beneath the table. Buddy pawed at it, whining louder. With a deep breath, Mrs. Carter pried it open. The trust between man and dog became clear. Buddy knew exactly where his master's secret lay hidden. Beneath the loose floorboard lay a small metal box, scratched from years of use. Mrs. Carter pulled it out, her hands shaking. Buddy stood close, tail stiff, eyes locked on her movements. She opened the box slowly and gasped. Inside were sealed envelopes and several small containers of medication. The note had been right. This was vital for Daniel's survival. Buddy whined softly, his head tilted as if he understood the significance. Mrs. Carter's eyes filled with tears. Daniel had trusted his faithful dog more than anyone else, and Buddy had not failed to deliver his master's message. Clutching the metal box, Mrs. Carter hurried outside, Buddy trotting closely beside her. The warm afternoon sun cast long shadows on the street as they rushed toward her car. Buddy jumped into the passenger seat without hesitation, his eyes fixed ahead. Mrs. Carter started the engine, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. She glanced at the box on the seat, and then at Buddy. "We'll get this to him in time," she whispered. The dog's ears perked, as though he understood every word. Together, they carried not just medicine, but the weight of a man's fragile hope. The hospital lobby buzzed with voices and hurried footsteps when Mrs. Carter arrived, clutching the box. Buddy pattered beside her, drawing surprised looks from staff and visitors. She rushed to the reception desk, breathless, holding out the note and box. "This belongs to Daniel Harris. He needs this now," she pleaded. Nurses exchanged urgent glances and quickly moved. Buddy sat obediently at her side, tail still, eyes locked on the hallway ahead. In that moment, the dog's devotion had led them to the very threshold of hope, where medicine, faith, and loyalty would decide Daniel's fate. Doctors rushed Daniel's medication from the box into his room. His face was pale, his breath shallow, but his eyes flickered open as he heard hurried footsteps. He recognized Mrs. Carter standing at the doorway, clutching the empty box, and Buddy sitting proudly by her side. Tears welled in his tired eyes. He wanted to speak, but the oxygen mask muffled his words. Still, his gaze said everything: gratitude, relief, and the deep bond that had carried his plea across the neighborhood. For a moment, hope pushed back the shadow of fear lingering in the hospital room. That night, as machines beeped steadily, Buddy lay curled up at Daniel's bedside. The golden retriever's golden fur shimmered under the hospital lights, his head resting gently on the edge of the bed. Daniel reached out a trembling hand, brushing Buddy's soft coat with weak fingers. His silver watch glinted faintly, marking the time of survival. Nurses who passed by paused, touched by the sight of man and dog reunited. Though exhausted, Daniel felt stronger simply by having Buddy near him. The dog's loyalty was not only comforting, it was healing, binding them in a quiet promise of resilience. Mrs. Carter sat quietly in the waiting room, her auburn hair tied back, eyes weary but hopeful. She had never imagined she'd be drawn so deeply into her neighbor's life, yet here she was, guardian of his secret, witness to his bond with Buddy. She replayed the image of the note tied to the dog's collar, realizing how extraordinary it was. Outside, sunlight filtered through the tall hospital windows, casting gentle warmth into the sterile halls. She whispered to herself, "That dog saved him." And she knew in her heart that loyalty had written a story no one would forget. Days passed, and Daniel slowly regained his strength. His color returned, his breaths grew steadier, and the sparkle in his hazel eyes reappeared. Still frail, he managed to smile whenever Buddy padded into the room. Doctors credited the timely medication for saving him, but Daniel always shook his head gently, pointing to Buddy. "He's the reason I'm here," he whispered hoarsely. The golden retriever wagged his tail, eyes shining as if he understood. Sunlight filled the hospital room each morning, reflecting Daniel's steady recovery and the irreplaceable role of a faithful dog who never gave up. When Daniel was strong enough to sit upright, Mrs. Carter came into the room with a warm smile. He reached for her hand, his scarred cheek lifting as tears welled in his eyes. "You saved me. You and Buddy," he said, his voice raspy but full of sincerity. Buddy pressed his golden head against Daniel's knee, tail sweeping the floor gently. The nurse paused at the doorway, moved by the simple but profound reunion. In that small hospital room, sunlight streaming through the window, gratitude flowed freely, a reminder that kindness and loyalty could change the course of fate. After weeks in the hospital, Daniel finally returned home. He stepped carefully onto his porch, leaning on his cane. His light blue shirt and worn jeans hung loosely on his thinner frame, but his smile was wide. Buddy bounded ahead, golden fur gleaming in the sun, tail wagging joyfully as he circled his master. Neighbors clapped softly from across the street, touched by the sight. The house, once silent and heavy, seemed alive again with the sound of paws and laughter. For Daniel, walking through his front door meant more than survival. It meant reclaiming life with his loyal friend. Word of Buddy's devotion spread quickly through the neighborhood. Families stopped by with warm smiles, some bringing treats for the dog, others flowers for Daniel. Mrs. Carter retold the story often, her voice trembling with awe each time. People who once passed by casually now paused, touched by the reminder that love can appear in unexpected forms. Buddy became more than just a pet. He was a symbol of loyalty. Sitting proudly beside Daniel, his eyes glowing under the afternoon sun, he seemed to understand that his quiet act of faith had inspired an entire community. Recovery was not easy. Daniel's steps were slow, his breath sometimes shallow, but Buddy was always at his side. Each morning, walk became a little longer, each smile a little brighter. Daniel leaned on his cane, while Buddy trotted faithfully, adjusting his pace to match. Neighbors often waved, encouraged by the sight. "You've got a true friend," one elderly man said, nodding at Buddy. Daniel would laugh softly, patting the dog's golden head. For both man and animal, healing was not just physical, it was the restoration of trust, companionship, and the strength to face life's trials together. On warm afternoons, Daniel sat on his porch with Buddy sprawled across his lap. He stroked the dog's fur slowly. His scarred cheek relaxed in contentment. Mrs. Carter sometimes joined them, bringing small gifts or simply sharing stories. For her, Buddy's act had bridged a gap between neighbors, turning strangers into friends. Daniel often whispered to Buddy, "I owe you everything, boy." The golden retriever closed his eyes, basking in both the sun and his master's affection. The porch, once a place of waiting and sorrow, had become a stage for love, resilience, and unspoken promises of loyalty. Months later, Daniel stood proudly in his yard, healthier and stronger. His cane rested lightly at his side as Buddy sat close, golden fur shining in the morning sun. He looked around at the neighbors gathered, their smiles reflecting admiration. Daniel raised his voice, sharing his gratitude, his scar catching the light as he smiled. "This dog saved my life." Tears filled his eyes as Buddy pressed against his leg, tail wagging gently. The crowd clapped, but Daniel only looked down at his faithful companion. Their story was no longer just theirs. It had become a memory for everyone.